Okay. Welcome. This is the first time that we're not doing this on Rosh HaHodesh. Ironically, I'm going to be talking about Rosh HaHodesh. But thank you for coming, despite the fact that I cannot say Chodesh Tov. So usually I spend most of the class talking about Froman and Shagar and some other modern thinkers. We're going to get to them at the end, but I want to actually look at a bunch of classical or Jewish sources this time. I hope you'll forgive me. And we're going to talk about the calendar. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the start of the Jewish calendar, at least in Tanakh. By the time you get to the Mishnah, there's 4 different starts of the year for different things. And we're going to talk about what it means for the Jewish people as a group that we have a calendar. Broadly speaking, we're talking about the political meaning of the calendar. Because politics is a term we use to denote how you manage, or how we as a group manage the dynamics of our group, what holds us together and what makes us different from other groups, and the who can tell what people to do what when and stuff like that. And the calendar actually has a really important function in doing that. So we're going to talk about that and what that has to do with when we get the mitzvah of the calendar and how it functions throughout Jewish history and some different texts about that until today. So before we get started, any basic questions that I might have missed or anything? Great. So the first source on this source sheet is an article from The Economist. That is what sent me down this route, called Rulers of Time, dealing with this issue, different times in history when clocks and calendars and things have been changed or established or whatever for political reasons. I'll start reading. This is a couple of excerpts from, I think, the beginning and the end of it. In the modern era, measurement of time provides a way to underline the clout of central government. Both India and China, despite their size, have a single time zone, which keeps everyone marching in step with the capital. It also offers an opportunity for emphasizing independence and nonconformity. Hugo Chavez turned the clocks back by half an hour in 2007 to move Venezuela into its own time zone, supposedly to allow for a fairer distribution of the sunrise, but also ensuring that the Socialist Republic did not share a time zone with the United States. In theory, modern technology offers liberation from temporal tyranny by allowing people to use whichever system they prefer. The internet runs on universal time, a global standard used by astronomers and other scientists based on a network of atomic clocks. As modern as this sounds, it is really the latest incarnation of Greenwich Mean Time, with all its attendant imperialist cultural baggage. But smartphones and computers can seamlessly translate between time zones and calendar systems, allowing people to use whichever they like. There is no reason why email clients or web calendars could not allow the use of the French revolutionary clock and calendar systems, say, alongside Muslim and North Korean ones. In practice, however, time zones and calendars are more than just arbitrary ways to rule lines on time. They do not merely specify how to refer to a particular instant or period. They also dictate and coordinate activities across entire societies, in particular by defining which days are working days and national holidays. These have to be consistent within countries and, in some cases, between them. Just ask Saudi Arabia, which in 2013 moved its weekend from Thursday to Friday to Friday Saturday to bring it in line with other Arab states. The need for such coordination means there is no escape from centralized control of clocks and calendars. It explains why the tendency to politicize them is timeless. Some of the things that got mentioned in there were like when the French Revolution happened, they wanted to change the clock. We're going to have a new clock for our new, more democratic era. Saving the Soviet Revolution, we're going to have a new work week with less days. We're going to run our own work week. And just clocks and calendars have been tightly connected to revolutions and to politics. And the reason for that is that, like as it sort of says here, clocks are made up. Calendars are made up. The things that we as people make that are not at all inherent in reality. To some degree, the solar calendar is inherent in reality because the Earth does go around the sun a certain, once every 365 and a quarter days, but that's not something we experience. The moon is closer, right? We're going to talk a little bit about the lunar calendar because that's what Tanakh sort of runs on. So it's some combination of lunar and solar. And the moon we can observe repeating a cycle, but like everything else is not natural. We start with Shabbat. In a very real way, the first chapter of Bereshit is not just about the creation of the world, it's about the creation of like a measured unit of time that has nothing to do with the world. that the set marking of 6 days and a seventh day as unique and that cycle repeats is not something evident in nature. It's something that gets created above that. And one function of all this is to unite people. We're the people who work on this time zone or whatever. Just as another way for emphasizing this is I am from and have family in California, 10 hours behind our time zone here. And in some ways, it would be easier to coordinate with them if we all ran on the same time zone. I could say, okay, let's talk on the phone at 10 o'clock or whatever, and I would all know what I meant. I wouldn't have to clarify, okay, what time do you mean by that? Who's 10 o'clock? But I wouldn't know, for example, what time they're sleeping. We all actually sort of sleep based on natural things, daylight and night, the nighttime. And so we keep our clocks close to when we're going to be sleeping and regular based on that, which is why we get time zones. And so we end up all having to coordinate and figure out whose time it is when, but we actually know what that time means. So if I say 10 a.m., 10 a.m. means roughly the same thing for a person anywhere in the world experientially, even if it's, they don't line up, the different 10 a.m.s. We all sort of have the same experience of the world at 10 a.m. Unless you live too far north, and it's just dark all the time. Okay, so with that intro, let's look at some Torah. The second source on the sheet is from Sefer Shemot. It's the very end almost of the whole process of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Not quite before the last plague. If I recall, this is right before in the midst of the ninth plague. I have to look that up again. But they're really getting ready to leave Egypt, and Hashem says to Moshe, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month, the first for you of the months of the year." So this is the first mitzvah, famously prompting Rashi and the Midrash to ask, why do we even need the whole of the Torah before this? If the Torah is about mitzvot, it should start with this. But notably set off from the rest of the mitzvot that we don't really get for several more chapters. So does anyone have any thoughts on why we get this mitzvah here? Why does this mitzvah happen as we're leaving Egypt? All mixed up in the whole process of leaving Egypt is the sudden commandment. This is going to be the first year month. This is going to be the start of your calendar.
Well, if you're saying that it's a political move that unites people into a people, then it makes sense that it happens right before Bnei Israel leaves Egypt and becomes a separate people.
Right.
And it makes sense also that you start from that point, because this is like the beginning of them becoming a people. So it lines up pretty nicely.
Yeah. So this is going to be, I think, very powerfully an explanation of what the calendar is doing. The calendar is making us a people. And that also sets it apart from the rest of the mitzvot, that we can debate and talk about what their function, what they do, but we're coming together as a people before we're ever getting, so to speak, God's Torah, which I think is an interesting dichotomy, that there's a period of time where we are a people before we've received sort of what we're doing as a people, the Torah. With that in mind, I want to look at the next source. This source is going to talk about, okay, what is this calendar for? Who are these people as opposed to who else? Anytime you want to talk about a political group, right? It's one nation as opposed to another, or not necessarily in terms of enmity, but having a distinct identity. I'm me and not you. We are us and not some other people.
So, what's the difference you would say in this case versus at Har Sinai as a nation? What's the difference?
So I think part of it is just about how we understand ourselves, right? There's a moment where the way we understand ourselves is based on we're part of this group of people, and that's the fundamental aspect of what it means to be Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Disconnected from what it means to be Jewish is to serve God.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't have this before, you'd say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically,
because they were a group,
right.
We're doing the same things.
Right. It's always interesting to think about what was it like in Egypt.
Right.
So, for example, if we're talking about the function of calendars and holidays and stuff, in terms of shaping the way we see ourselves and what groups we see ourselves as part of, did they to what degree did they observe Egyptian holidays? The answer is I don't know. There's no way of knowing.
Right.
But assuming that even if their work day was or week work calendar was scheduled based on holidays, if Egyptian holidays were days when they didn't have to work or something, that would be have a significant effect and make them see themselves as part of Egyptian society. And this would be a part of sort of knocking them loose.
Well, also just by virtue of saying this month is to be free, the first month of the year, that would seem to say that until this point there was a different first month of the year, no?
Right. This seems to be that they're certainly running on someone else's calendar.
Right.
Yeah.
Which means, and especially if the whole thing here is that the calendar is really what unites you with a nation, then that means they were up until this point united with another nation, with other nations.
Also, it gets touched on in the next source as well. So let's look at that. This is from the Mechilta, a Halach Midrash on Shemot. And it's going to read that verse we just read and pick up on the fact that it repeats twice, Lakhem, for you. This month is to be for you, as opposed to Adam HaRishon, who did not count from it, who didn't count from the first month of Nisan. Does for you mean as opposed to how Adam HaRishon counted, or perhaps for you means as opposed to how the non-Jews count? When it says the first for you, that means for you, not for the non-Jews. Why does it say the second for you? For you as opposed to Adam HaRishon, who did not count from it. So the Midrash is saying that the fact that the pasuk says twice for you, this month is to be for you the first month, the first for you of the months of the year, is signifying that our calendar sets us off not just from the non-Jews, but also from Adam HaRishon. That both Adam HaRishon and the non-Jews counted according to the sun, or based on some other month.
Wouldn't we say Adam Rishon was a non-Jew?
Yeah, so that's a good point, is that it's actually makes a lot of sense that the non-Jews would count the same way as Adam.
The Jewish person from Avram Avinu, that's the earliest Jewish.
What Avram Avinu is probably the first person we'd call a Jew. Interesting to wonder, how did he count? What is his calendar like?
He's not a part of a nation. The Jewish nation is born in Har Sinai. But
Well, actually, what I'm saying,
practical Jew is Avram Avinu.
yeah.
Right?
Well, what I'm suggesting now is actually that the nation is really born with this mitzvah, with the giving of the calendar at the moment when they're leaving Egypt. So I think part of that is that it sets us off from Adam HaRishon, from how everyone has counted before this moment, and then going forward, it continues to separate us from the other nations who count the same way that Adam counted.
Like it's a new way to count.
Yeah, it's a new way to count, and this is something that marks a new moment in history in terms of and all the way that revolutions were marked by the creating of a new calendar or a new holiday, a new clock, whatever. We're like, we're doing something new now. It's different than what came before. But also the same way that Venezuela shifted in order to not be part of America anymore. Or actually, just an example that I think we might see soon, Vietnam shifted off of Japan's calendar to throw off sort of the last remnants of Japanese imperialism. That was a way of saying we're separate from the other people as well.
Also, so your claim basically is that this mitzvah, in and of itself, is what's separating, not the fact that like something related to time, they didn't have that kind of control, whatever related to their situation. You're saying the emphasis isn't on like the situation that they came out of, but rather, in and of itself, is what makes it like.
I wouldn't say that, because I think in theory, if God took the Jews out of Egypt without giving them a new calendar, then they would still become separate from. I think it's more about how we understand the calendar. That the reason the calendar was given then was in order to help separate them and make them distinct. Because the calendar could have been given later. Like, why is it so important that in the middle of the whole process of leaving Egypt, they get the calendar all of a sudden? I think it's part of a larger dynamic going on then. I had a really interesting shiur once from Rabbi Adi Kron, who's in the Camp Stone Beit Midrash. He was talking about the Korban Pesach. And so the Korban Pesach is only called that in times of Chazal. If you look throughout Tanakh, it's called a Zevach Pesach. Zevach is another word related to Korban. It means more specifically sort of to slaughter and has less of the implications of bringing it as an offering to God. Particularly because it seems like some of the root of the word Korban is probably have to do with bringing something near to God, right? Bringing this to God as an offering. And what he points out is that the Zevach Pesach lacks any sense of bringing that animal you slaughtered to God. What it is instead is that it's a group offering, right? You do it each person to a household or with a group of people in one household. In fact, it's not only that, it's a time when God is poseach. God actually stays away from the Jews at that moment. So the giving of the whole process of the Korban Pesach in Egypt is about closeness with Jews and distance from God. Not in a sort of punishment sense we often think about distance from God, but just in the sense of like, that's not what we're doing. We're not focusing on God. It's the same distinction we were just talking about between, say, this mitzvah and the rest of the Torah at Har Sinai, which is about the nation's relationship with God. In this moment, the nation is focusing on it being internally cohesive instead of being dedicated to God and the Torah, etc. I also think this is connected to and a good way of thinking about a larger debate, which is about like, why did God care about the Jews in Egypt? Particularly if you think of the Jews as, in many ways, very Egyptian. And the Rambam and the Kuzari, HaHodesh, basically debate, like, what does God care about the Jews in that moment? Or in general, why does God care about Abraham and his descendants? And the debate is often framed in terms of hardware versus software. Sort of modern analogy. For Rabbi Yehuda Levi, God loves the Jews because there was something special in Adam HaRishon that by the time you get to Abraham is only in Abraham, it's not in the rest of Adam's descendants, and then it is in all of Yaakov Avinu's descendants. The Jewish people are the people who have this special genetic code that makes them sort of extra divine and more than human. And for the Rambam, it's really sort of the Torah and the idea that Abraham is the one who discovered God and taught his children about it, and those sort of ideas are what make the Jewish people into God's people. And what this might suggest, and this I think is sort of much easier to see in the text of Tanakh, is that what makes the Jewish people God's people is the people who keep God's calendar. That God said, you are going to be people now, you're going to come together on certain times and exist based on your own schedule as opposed to other people. And sort of that's what makes us God's people, as opposed to either certain ideas that we might have, which is sort of Rambam's approach, or something in our genes, which would be sort of Rabbi Yehuda Levi. Any questions so far? Great. Let's move on to the next part. We'll talk here about changing the calendar. Here's this first piece I mentioned, North Korea and Japan, not Vietnam, North Korea. There we are. So North Korea is shifting its time zone this week to reverse the imposition of Tokyo time by wicked Japanese imperialists in 1912. So I think this article was written in 2012, maybe 2015, I don't know, something like that. And North Korea was changing its clock because Japan had been in control of North Korea and set its clock so that it would run with Japan time. And they had long freed themselves. North Korea had not been part of Japan for a very long time, but they were still running with Japan time. And so in order to sort of assert their own independence and feel like have a sense of themselves as being different from Japan, they were shifting the clock. We're going to look at now is two texts from, one from Tanakh, one from the Mishnah, that I think essentially that only makes sense if you think of the calendar this way and are really working with the same sort of function of the calendar. So does anyone know who Yeroboam was from Melachim? Yeroboam was the first king of Malchut Yisrael.
Yeah, separate from Lakhem.
Yeah, as opposed to Malchut Yehuda. Before Yeroboam, there was a united kingdom that David had united the groups of Yehuda and Yisrael very strongly into one nation, and Shlomo continues that, and then really right after Shlomo dies, it falls apart. Yeroboam already shows up before Shlomo dies. He and Shlomo don't get along. He runs away for a little while, but he comes back when Shlomo's son Rehoboam is in charge, and people don't like Rehoboam, and Yeroboam is sort of leading the people and says, look, if you lower taxes, we'll all be fine, everything will be great. But Rehoboam doubles down and makes things worse, and Yeroboam splits off 10 tribes into a separate kingdom, as he'd been told by the prophet that he would do. But then he runs into this problem, which we're going to see now, which is, how do I, assert a concrete identity of my kingdom as a different kingdom than the kingdom they were, a day ago. A day ago we were one united kingdom, now we're two. And how does people experience that difference? What makes people change their minds about who they are? I've been doing a lot of reading. Anyone want to read? No pressure. We're at source number 5. Great.
Yeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their alliance to their lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Once he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan, and this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. Yeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levian. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, a share of Badah Bilbo, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings.
Thank you. So Yeroboam is worried that people will go back to the temple, where they go every holiday in order to bring sacrifices and celebrate with their family and as a people. And as they'll get there, they'll go, what is even happening that we're separate people? Once you're celebrating the same holidays and coming together, you're the same people. So it's weird to be 2 different kingdoms. And so Yeroboam does essentially 3 things. He makes different places of worship by recreating twice the most famous sin in Jewish history, which is an interesting choice. It's a different discussion. He appoints other priests. You don't have to be a Levi in order to help with the process of sacrifices. But then he creates a different festival on a different holiday, a different month. This is a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, which is a translation of Asher Badah Milibo, which could also just mean he sort of made up. In modern Hebrew, Badah has become Bidyon, fiction. And there's a couple possibilities. One is he created a new holiday in the 8th month, which biblically is Cheshvan, after Tishrei. But the way the Abarbanel understands this, and I think this makes a lot of sense, is HaHodesh Asher Badal Milibo doesn't just mean, he, at random picked a month in order to make a new holiday there. Is that he came up with a fictional month. He just added a month to the calendar in order to shift the entire calendar a month later. So that Sukkot, in the 7th month, Tishrei, on the 15th of the 7th month, when all of the Jews would have gone to the temple, to Yerushalayim, now there was no reason to go from Malchut Yisrael to Yerushalayim then, because he had made up this extra month, and the holiday was actually a month later. So you would go a month later.
Extra month added?
Some point between Nisan and Tishrei.
But wouldn't they just go to Jerusalem the next month?
Well, if they added an extra month, so that all of their things fell out a month later, they could go to Jerusalem, but they'd be going when no one else was going, right? Everyone around there wouldn't be celebrating then. So even then, it would keep them. Only the people from Malchut Yisrael celebrate then. At that point, there's almost no purpose of going because the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim is not celebrating then. So it successfully creates a different set of holidays.
Why didn't that create a Pesach Sheni or Purim Katan kind of situation like now? Why didn't you know about this as well?
Well, it doesn't seem to have survived. unclear even if it survived him throughout Malchut Yisrael, but then also Malchut Yisrael is conquered and exiled, I think like 150 years or something before Malchut Yehuda is conquered and exiled. And nothing survived from them to us as far as we're aware.
Who's the person who says the Edom?
I believe it's the Abarbanel. I can look it up for you when I get home.
There's two interesting things here. I
Yeah.
think one, that the different God came along with the different calendar, which is interesting in terms of what Yifat was talking about of the people. The coming up with a separate calendar, was it separate from being the Torah? I think it is interesting that it kind of the two a little bit have to go hand in hand here. Meaning you couldn't just make a different calendar, it had to be a different calendar. And also that means there's a different kind of worship. Because the kind of worship that fits with this calendar, with the current calendar, is going to be all messed up if now you have to go to that God and whatever. Also, I think up until this point you talked about the months and the year being different, but we didn't focus so much on the holidays being different. But that's such a significant part of the year being different. Meaning if people are celebrating the same holidays but different years or different months, then all of your holidays are not the same anymore. Because even if you just think about how much of our holiday has to do with seasonality in all the holidays, right? Like if you've moved the months and the calendar, you've changed all the holidays drastically. Like Sukkot could not exist in every time of year. It can only exist in some times of the year. So
Right, or also the fact that HaZeh has in our calendar with Elul, Zman,
Yeah.
everything.
it really throws everything off. So I think there's it's not just you're if you're living among a nation and you have different calendars, then you'll say let's meet on this day and you'll be talking about different days. It's the whole structure of your life in society completely changes religiously and otherwise.
And if you want to look at a really practical effect of that in sort of a modern day society, would be, what months or when are the supermarkets crazy packed? People structure their shopping and their lives around when the holidays are, when they have to stock up for what their whole life is doing, and what they're doing, with their days and things. And that would be totally different. We're the people who flood the supermarkets this week. They're the people who do it next week.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of the really significant aspect of the calendar, is that it is so fundamental that you don't necessarily notice the way it structures your whole life.
Wait, it was last Shabbos, Parsha, what's it called? I'm confused. Was it this week? Is it this week or next week that we're reading Parsha HaHodesh?
We should do last week.
It was
Last
week,
week, we
right?
had 3 separate Torah.
Yeah.
We had Parshas
Oh, I
Shavua,
thought I saw
Parshas
it.
HaHodesh, and Rosh Chodesh.
Well, every week now is something. So I think this week is Shabbat Gadol.
We have in the afternoon, we have many drashos.
Yeah.
Next Shabbat is Pesach.
It's okay. My calendar that I got from my dry cleaner said last week Shabbat with Tzom Gedalia. So that was clearly wrong.
Mine said that's why I was what?
Glad to know we all use the same dry cleaner. And we can't trust that calendar anymore.
Unless it's someone trying to create something.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, you'd be interesting study on the way the dry cleaners control our calendars.
I wanted to see how many people were fasting.
Okay, so the next text is from the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. As I said earlier, the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah deals with the calendar extensively. It starts with Arba Rosh Hashanah, so there are 4 different beginnings of the year, depending on if you're talking about kings and Jewish kings and non-Jewish kings, but also for financial years for animals and plants and things. And then in the second parak, it deals extensively with the process of Ibur HaHodesh, of the Kiddush HaHodesh, of the Chazal rabbis receiving witnesses who've said, I saw the moon in this place in the sky, in this shape of the moon, and based on that, this is the day that Rosh Chodesh is going to be. And based on that, Chazal would have, at that time, determine this is the day Rosh Chodesh is going to be, and we're going to set all of the calendars based on that. They would send out runners to inform the Jews throughout the Jewish diaspora, where people were living in Bavel and wherever, that this is when we're going to have the holidays and the calendars and everything. And it's like now we have a set calendar, but Right, so this is going to describe a story between Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi, sort of the political leader of the Jewish people when they didn't have actual political power, and
I was thinking this when we were just talking about the.
yeah, it's a sort of famous story. It's a really good story.
Yeah.
Where it highlights a really important aspect of this as well. And Rabbi Yoshua, we're going to have a debate about the
Who decides when the beginning?
when things are. Does anyone want to read the first paragraph?
Yeah.
Sure.
It once happened that two witnesses came and testified. We saw it in the morning of the 29th in the east and in the evening of the 30th in the west. Said Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, it's impossible for them to have seen the new moon in the morning, since the new moon is only visible in the west at evening. Thus, they are false witnesses. However, when they came to Yavne, Rabban Gamliel, who knew through astronomical calculations that the new moon should have been visible in the evening of the 30th, accepted their testimony. On another occasion, two witnesses came and testified. We saw it in its expected time on the night preceding the 30th, but on the night of its
Intercalation.
the 31st, it was not seen, and Rabbi Gamliel accepted their testimony. Said Rabbi Joseph ben Harkinas, they are false witnesses. How can they testify that a woman has given birth when on the next day her belly is still swollen, appearing to be between her teeth? Rabbi Yoshua said to him, I approve of your words. Rabban Gamliel sent him, Rabbi Yoshua, a message. I decree upon you that you come to me with your staff of money on the day which, according to you, will be Yom Kippur.
Okay.
Wow, that's it's like the election for Jewish.
So he thought it was later?
Yeah, basically he said that Yom Kippur would not be happening.
In other words, it was like Michal Yom Kippur and your calculation.
Yeah.
It's really very.
The important aspect of this is to end up with two different calculations for when Yom Kippur is going to be. And Rabban Gamliel, who's, as I said, the Nasi, he's technically in charge. He says to Rabbi Yoshua, come on the day you think is Yom Kippur and violate Yom Kippur, which is a sort of extreme demand for obedience. Yom Kippur is arguably the holiest day of the year, with the most sort of significant degree of sanctity that Rabbi Yoshua would have to violate.
But isn't there something in the fact that, like, it's saying, like, we determine the time, so, you know, if somebody has determined it.
Okay, so you can read the next paragraph, because that deals with that.
Rabbi Akiva went to Rabbi Yoshua and found him in great distress, and he was ordered to violate the day that was Yom Kippur according to his calculation. He said to him, I can bring you proof that whatever Rabban Gamliel has done is valid, for it says, in following our God's appointed holy days that you will designate in their appointed times. And whether they are designated in their proper time or not at their proper time, I have no holy days save these.
So this is a midrash that's used for the purpose of halacha more broadly, but is
everything you said is automatically, even if it's wrong.
well, that's a different drasha about rabbinic authority. This is specifically about the nature of the holidays. God says the Elam Moedei Hashem Asher Tikru Otam B'Moedam. These are the holidays of God that you shall declare them in their time. It's not like the process of declaring the holidays, the Midrash says, is not about discovering what time the holidays are supposed to fall out on, as if the calendar was a sort of fact of nature we had to uncover.
Even though we kind of do that now in a certain sense, don't we? Wouldn't you say? Because like everything's so calculated.
Well, so even here we're talking about basing it on the moon. So there is some aspect of like it's connected to nature, and we do the connection to nature with the moon. Also, it's supposed to be seasonal, so it has to be. That's why we add an extra month to make sure it stays in, like Pesach stays in the spring, and it's related to the harvest and all kinds of stuff where it is related to nature. But the ultimate sort of validity of what day it is not a function of nature.
Right, so I'm saying nowadays, wouldn't you say we do it more based on nature than on man?
Meaning when they only had the option of running and telling someone I saw the moon, then that was kind of the only thing you could count on.
Right, but now
But we can calculate things now.
So we don't even have man saying like this or that. We just
Well, now it's entirely a human structure. Right now we have a set calendar. We don't even base it on the moon.
Right.
So yeah. I think I misunderstood what you were saying. Isn't it more? I think you meant, isn't it more based on nature now?
Oh, essentially.
No, but
It's more
isn't it?
calculated now.
Yeah.
Meaning here it was like you could be wrong, you could be right, but it didn't really matter because it's whatever we designate it to be.
Right. So now it's even more based on whatever, it says whatever Rabban Gamliel does is valid. then it's even more in that model now.
It's interesting because I would understand it more. I think with
Yeah.
what Yifat's saying of the other way around, where it's not up to a person to say, I think it's this day or think it's that day. It's actually like calculated in advance to say this is when the moon is going to
We don't
appear.
have witnesses anymore.
This is when it's going to happen.
Right, it's because
Yeah,
the determination that Rabbi Gamliel has done, so that sort of model of what we've decided what day it is, has uprooted the entire.
Oh, because he said it's
process.
based on his calculation.
Yeah, here it's based on calculations, and they have different calculations.
And that's what they accepted.
Yeah,
So that's like the ultimate, like man's involvement, or like saying, okay,
yeah.
okay.
I give you the authority to determine
Yeah.
where Rosh Chodesh is. For you to decide, not for God. God has given you.
Right, they couldn't have really seen the moon, but they calculated that they could have seen the moon, so
Yeah.
it's fine.
וזה מקדש יתראה בזמנים, לא נקדש בשבת, מקדש ישראל.
Yeah.
Israel בין הזמנים.
Yeah, so that is Rabbi Akiva's argument for why Rabbi Yeshua should accept what Rabbi Gamliel said. Because Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel is not wrong. Meaning, Rabbi Yeshua, if his problem is I'm going to be doing it I'm going to be coming on the day that is officially Yom Kippur, that's not like a fact of nature, right? What Rabbi Gamliel decided is the fact of nature, or is the day of the holidays, and that's what matters. But that doesn't actually convince Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yeshua. Does anyone have any thoughts on why that might not have convinced him?
Because the day is still the day. He's still breaking what he thinks is Yom Kippur, even if according to someone else it's not.
Right. So I think the idea that it's whatever Bnei Israel declare is the day, doesn't actually help when you're talking about two different people within Bnei Israel. Like what makes Rabbi Gamliel's charge sort of the one that the one he decides is Yom Kippur. What makes that correct as opposed to Rabbi Yeshua? So that's going to be what the next paragraph of this is talking about. He, Rabbi Yeshua, came to Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas, who said to him, if we question the ruling of the Beit Din of Rabbi Gamliel, we must question the ruling of every Beit Din from the time of Moshe up to the present day. As it says, and Moshe ascended with Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. Why weren't the names of the elders specified? To show that every group of three sages that form a Beit Din is considered as the Beit Din of Moshe and Aaron. He, Rabbi Yeshua, took his staff and his money and went to Yavne to Rabbi Gamliel on the day of Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Yeshua's calculation. Rabbi Gamliel rose and kissed him on his head and said to him, "Come in peace, my master and my disciple, my master in wisdom and my disciple, because you accepted my words."
It's really, really very.
So,
Moshe would be difficult to come to the days.
no, the emotional resolution here. The emotional resolution here, then, is very intense because of the sort of intense emotions and processes and almost violations involved. But Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas, who you should note in the first paragraph is the person who disagrees with Rabbi Gamliel. He's the one who says, it's you couldn't possibly have seen it when you say you've seen the moon when you say you saw it. So it must be later. Rabbi Yeshua accepts his argument as opposed to Rabbi Gamliel. He's the one who says to Rabbi Yeshua, we have to listen to Rabbi Gamliel. And the reason is because Rabbi Gamliel is the leader of the Beit Din, and every Beit Din is considered to be like the Beit Din of Moshe and Aaron. And actually, there are other texts, the Midrashim that go into this, and the Ramban points out in his commentary on that first pasuk we looked at. The Ramban says, if you look, that pasuk, God gave this mitzvah to Moshe and Aaron. The mitzvah is actually given to leaders. It's not given to the people as a whole. Essentially because it's a political thing, and politics always requires, this is why we just had elections, because anytime you're trying to organize a group of people, it requires someone to, decide the final questions of what the people are going to do. You need, in order to determine where armies move, who gets what money and funding, what, you're going to be, what your goals are as a country, or as a group of people, and also, when we celebrate holidays. Like, if you don't have one ultimate authority who determines when the holidays are, then you end up with Yerabim all over again. You end up with people who end up, celebrating different calendars. If Rabbi Yeshua did not, ultimately accept Rabbi Gamliel's authority, at the very least, he would be keeping a totally different calendar from everyone else. And so, what he ultimately accepts here is Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas's argument that the calendar requires some degree of acceptance of authority, that it's part of shaping who we are as a collective, that we all are people who keep the same calendar, and that means it has to be one calendar.
Well, there also has to be a standard as to who we can accept as a leader.
That's definitely true. And so there's a couple ways of doing that. One would be Beit Din, right? If Beit Din is the one celebrating or setting the calendar, then it would be based on whoever could be on Beit Din. And you look in texts of Chazal, and there's all kinds of standards for who can be on a Beit Din and who can be on a Sanhedrin and things like that. Another possibility is that, roughly the form of kingship, and that's what was happening in Yeroboam. It's also kind of what's happening with the Nasi. The Nasi was from the line of David, and it gave him a sense of authority over the...
There are different areas focused within the Jewish community.
That's true. You could have different people in authority over different areas based on different things. If it helps, there's an interesting distinction they make in legal theory and theories of authority versus being in authority versus being an authority. A-N.
Mm-hmm.
If you are in authority, your authority comes from the role you're filling. It's like that space in the structure. You're at the head of the structure, and anyone could sit in that seat and have authority. And that's roughly how a king works. It doesn't matter if they're meant to be, if they're skilled at being a king. They're at the top of the chain of authority. And authority is someone who's an authority by virtue of themselves and the skills they have. Doctors are typically authorities by virtue of the fact that they've studied and have all the skills and knowledge that enables them to actually to fulfill their roles properly. And so we listen to them because we trust them based on that. So the Beit Din model is much more of an authority versus a Nasi king model is being in authority.
There's an interesting zoom out that happens here also where I think it's related to what we were talking about, where you want to go by what seems to make the most sense in terms of when the moon is supposed to arrive and what is supposed to be the structure of the calendar. But I like Rabbi Joseph Ben Harkness's point of, if you're going to question this, then you're literally questioning everything, because all of it came from here. And the zoom out of having to be I guess, if you want to stick with it, but this is the day it's supposed to happen and it can't be any other day, then you're going right back to the God telling you, this is the first day of the year, when that was just decided. It was decided by God and designated by people. So it doesn't make any sense to kind of get very scientific about it, because it's just not a hard science or math. It's
always
decided by people, right? But so is everything else in what we follow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of you can't get bogged down in the details in this case, because it's going to throw off the rest of the whole belief system, really.
Right. And even just in context of the calendar, basically everyone who's ever followed the Jewish calendar has followed Beit Din or some authority decided when the Jewish calendar was going to be. Even nowadays, when it's not set based on the monthly calculation of the moon, it's set because Chazal decided it once upon a time. Hillel, the second Hillel, created the calendar. We just follow his calendar.
Right. It's also kind of funny because it's you can follow this month when the moon came specifically, but it doesn't change what's happened every time up to this month. So if you're going to get scientific about it, you could be off by several months. Who knows? There's no point, because it's a man-designated, created schedule. So.
But even if he had kept his own month, I thought it would have changed. It wouldn't have been this. It was his calendar. This was the Jewish people's calendar. Because the next time a witness came along and said, "I see the moon," he would just revert back to what they said. So it would just be a one-time thing.
So that's true.
Unless he would have said it hasn't been enough days since the last time you were supposed to see the moon. And then it might have been confusing anyway.
It's possible it might have set off further calendars, but I think even without that, without the further months being off, it would have created a standard where he could just deviate whenever he wanted, meaning this isn't going to be a one-time thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it also comes down to questions of trusting witnesses, and also the exact way they saw the moon, where it was in the sky, how big it was, or whatever, are things you can ask a lot of questions about to really get as specific as possible, but there's always going to be some degree of gray areas. When you have a gray area, someone has to come along and decide what you're doing. And that's the authority involved in this. Okay, so unless anyone has any questions on that, I want to move on to the last section. I'm going to look at a piece from Rav Shagar, another piece from Rav Froman, and talk a little bit about what the calendar means for us today. And here we're going to look a little, at least for our Shagar piece, we're going to look at first, talk a little bit about the specific holidays. Because Jewish holidays have always been laden with meaning, right? Pesach is the holiday where it celebrates Yetziat Mitzrayim. Shavuot's interesting because in the Torah it's not clear what it's about. In Chazal it's about receiving the Torah. Sukkot it's about, we were in commemorating the trip in the desert in the Sukkot there, about celebrating the harvest. And these are all sort of moments of focusing on certain ideas and making those ideas part of who we are as a people. And the same thing is true of reasons for the mitzvot more generally. They sort of make ideas and things part of who we are, but also, for example, Shabbat. Shabbat is another part of our calendar, and it designates us as the people who keep Shabbat. And it also makes us the people who, by keeping Shabbat, focus on the idea that God created the world, the idea that all people are created equal, and everyone should be able to rest together, and things like that. And so Rav Shagar, living in the end of the 20th century in modern Israel, is going to talk about some of the uniquely Israeli holidays. One of the things that I thought was really cool about Rav Shagar when I was first encountering him is that he has a book of drashot that were called for HaGeh or Moadei Iyar, the holidays of Iyar, which is Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaTzma'ut, and Yom Yerushalayim. So what we're going to look at now is the last paragraph of a drasha for Yom Yerushalayim. And the drasha is dealing with the idea of Yom Yerushalayim more generally, the idea of Yerushalayim as specifically a city of shalom. Chazal point out that the last three letters of the name in Tanakh are Shin Lamed Mem. There's no Yud in Tanakh, and that means shalom, the city of shalom. They say Yerushalayim lo nitchalkal l'shvatim. It was not really divided given to one tribe. It was meant to be sort of accessible to all the tribes. It's officially both in Binyamin and in Yehuda. All of these kinds of things. And so Rav Shagar is going to take this as a moment to talk about the Yom Yerushalayim as a symbol of sort of a messianic future. And just sort of one more note about that is that this is part of his broader critique on religious Zionism as part of broader Zionist society as being too satisfied with political redemption, with a redemption that's just about, we're a people coming back to our land. So the Jews have always wanted more than that. As much as the calendar starts with making us a people, we've also hoped for Har Sinai. There's also hope for some sort of spiritual redemption. I'll read source number 7. I don't know how to depict this redemption, but Rabbi Nachman's words inspire me to think that perhaps if we stand vulnerable before God, this will enable a shift. Something transcendent will reveal itself, something that's beyond difference. I'm not talking about tolerance, nor about the removal of difference. The other that I see before me will remain different and inaccessible, and despite this, the divine infinite will position me by the other's side. Again, how this will manifest in practical or political terms, I do not know. Yom Yerushalayim will be able to turn from a nationalistic day, one which has turned with time into a tribalistic celebration of religious Zionism alone, into an international day. So this is a really sort of excited and expressive, almost romantic depiction of what Yom Yerushalayim could be in the future, and the sort of ethical shift that God will bring upon us in the Messianic age. And he wants to tie it specifically to Yom Yerushalayim. And something he points out in that drasha, and he alludes to here in this last line, where he calls Yom Yerushalayim a tribalistic celebration, is that only religious Zionists celebrate it. If you walk through the streets of Yerushalayim on Yom Yerushalayim, you'll see everyone doing their business, doing whatever, and then huge parades of people wearing blue and white, and all of them are religious Zionists. You can just tell by their outfits.
You can't see any.
Secular, Haredi, nobody celebrates it except religious Zionists. It's the day of who we are as religious Zionists. And so on one level he's critiquing that, because he thinks that there's a degree of tribalism that's not necessarily healthy, that makes us too concerned with ourselves as opposed to other people. But one thing that Rav Shagar talks about all the time is that we should have a strong personal identity as religious Zionists. And that's what Yom Yerushalayim is, right? If Yom Yerushalayim is our religious holiday, as opposed to Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is a secular holiday, where, as Shagar puts it, the korban of the Beit HaMikdash is replaced by the mangal of the park. Then Yom Yerushalayim is the specifically religious Zionist holiday. But what does it mean to have a day celebrating Yerushalayim? Because it could mean it's a day where we sort of assert our dominance in the city and we parade around the city and see it as ours. Or it could be a day where we think about the greater message of Yerushalayim, the city of Shalom. And that part of what it means to be religious Zionist is to have this greater religious urging to push you towards, hoping for Shalom and hoping for a better future, as opposed to being satisfied with the status quo.
So when he says the other, does he mean anyone specifically, or he just means everyone?
In context of that drasha, he mentions Arabs. He also mentions secular people. It's very broad in this sense.
Anyone who's not religious Zionist.
Yeah, and even other people in religious Zionism. It's very open, but he also alludes here at the end it should turn into a sort of international day. That would be a day that we celebrate the Jewish people's relationship with other nations and stuff as well. And part of that is, I think, recognizing, just going back to the way the calendar sets us off from other groups, that being religious Zionist is actually being part of a distinct group separate from the rest of Israeli culture. Like when we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, we're taking part in Israel, we're part of Israeli society. When we celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, we're specifically recognizing we're part of a different group, who have a different identity. And we, nowadays, we have all kinds of calendars. We haven't discussed, but it's noteworthy that we all run more or less according to the Gregorian calendar. Like, to a much greater degree, we all, count by January, February, March than we do by, Nisan, Tishrei, everything like that. Though even those months are Babylonian month names. The Ramban on the whole discussion in Shemot has a whole thing on why names are what they are. But we all navigate different identities that can be pretty clearly tracked by the different calendars we follow. And Shagar's trying to say that our distinct religious Zionist identity should give us a little religious distance from the secular state. Not that we're totally separate from it, but we should recognize that's not everything, that doesn't exhaust the religious idea of redemption. That religion really should push us towards a better future. Questions on that before we move on to Froman?
I'm just thinking it's like when we're aware that Christmas and Hanukkah have a crossover that year. You always have both calendars running in your head, and you're like, oh, this year they're all the same year.
Hanukkah was there, the furthest Christmas was the furthest Hanukkah.
Yeah, but we're always aware.
Next thing that happens is about 10th of something.
It's true.
Or if you're like, oh, this Thanksgiving falls out on you're always just aware of.
I guess I'm celebrating it the same day as my neighbors this week.
Yeah, it's like a weird reality of being aware when those two calendars
I feel like
intersect.
Christmas,
Or the Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's a good time. That highlights the nexus.
Next time going to be tens of hundreds of years.
Stuff like that highlights the sort of nexus of identities and calendars that is what it means to be modern Orthodox and religious Zionist and things like that. Is to end up celebrating weird days like Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Both they're thanking God. They both have the same purpose.
Right.
So the next piece is from Rav Menachem Froman. It's from this book Tim Lizman. It's a small book put out by I think Magid in 2017. Excellent short little drashot on the Chagim.
So what's the or Shagar or Froman?
So Shagar and Froman were rabbis in the religious Zionist community. Both they worked and taught together a lot. They were involved in the introduction of Chassidut into religious Zionism, and really interesting figures on their own right. Shagar was more of a yeshiva figure. He ran several different sort of yeshiva programs in Batei Midrash.
They were the same time?
Yeah, they were at the same time. They ran some institutions together. Rav Shagar died in 2007. Rav Froman died in 2013. Survived him a little bit. Rav Froman is also unique from Rav Shagar in terms of his... while he was heavily involved in yeshivot and taught in yeshivot his whole life and everything, he's actually seen by many as more of a cultural figure. He was heavily engaged with secular Israeli culture. There's been an ongoing, for the last year or two, play about him in Tel Aviv, put on by, I believe, a secular person. I was just at his yard site a couple of weeks ago, and they had a big gathering with lots of people, both religious and secular.
Zinger connected to that?
Yes, Rav Zinger was a student of Rav Shagar and Rav Froman, and Rav Steinsaltz, who's still alive. Rav Steinsaltz, Rav Shagar, and Rav Froman in the mid-1980s started a yeshiva called Makor Chaim together. It was actually called by many Shefa, which is an acronym for Shagar, Froman, Adin Steinsaltz. But also it's a Hasidic and Kabbalistic term, Shefa, meaning sort of divine abundance.
Also Siach.
Yeah, so Siach was Rav Shagar's yeshiva. That whole sort of movement is part of what Rav Froman and Rav Shagar were part of.
Okay. I just forget who's
Yeah, no, it's fine. I,
Okay.
in many ways, live in and with these people, so I forget that other people don't, read them literally every day.
Right.
And so, Rav Froman has a really interesting background in general, which is that he grew up secular. His father came to Israel and came as part of secular Zionism and sort of abandoned religion. And Rav Froman returned to religion at a certain point. But he comes with this very different background way of seeing Judaism and religion and things, and Rav Kook and all kinds of stuff. Very interesting and very worldly in a lot of ways. Like he talks a lot about academic scholarship and all kinds of interesting ways. He actually went to university. I think he was studying Machshavet Yisrael. He never finished his finals the last year, but very interesting guy. And he's going to talk in this piece about the sort of what he calls the revolutionary power of the calendar. He says, the event of the new moon, the chidush of the moon, was, for Chazal, the most intense instance where we encounter the creator and the renewer of the world. Revolutionary Marxism went to war against religion, primarily because it saw religion as an anti-revolutionary force. Religious faith can lead us to conservative conclusions. Religion can sanctify the status quo as the handiwork of the creator. However, we might also come to the exact opposite conclusion. If a person believes that the world is created, mechudash, made new in medieval terminology, then he believes that the world could radically be remade anew.
Meaning, he thinks that if he has that power to be creative, then he can change things.
So this is, I think, with less of an argument of here's the way the calendar works. Let's embrace that, which is trying to be inspire us to think a certain way, even if it's not how the calendar works necessarily. It says that the moon was a time when the event of the new moon was a time when you could meet the creator and renewer of the world. HaHodesh ha'olam. We say in so the bracha before creation, Mechadesh. We say Mechadesh Chadashim in Kiddush HaHodesh. We say God is Mechadesh Olamot Tamid, something like that. Yeah, Mechadesh Tamid V'aseh Bereshit. As he alludes to in the last line, it says that in sort of medieval Jewish philosophy, in the Rambam and the Kuzari, the idea that God created the world is called Chidush HaOlam. That God made the world as a brand new thing, instead of in ancient Greek philosophy making the world out of something else that was already existing. He's trying to argue against a certain way of seeing religion in favor of a different way. He says, revolutionary Marxism wants to see religion as inherently conservative. Religion always says we should keep doing what we've always been doing. That it's just the way things are, and God made it that way, and it should stay that way. But particularly if, as you point out, that the calendar is something that involves human creativity, saying that we shouldn't see God as denying human creativity or denying creativity in general. If the nature of the world is, that it's an act of creativity, then we should embrace that and see that as part of the calendar. We should, every time we mark the new month or we think about what it means to partake in the calendar, we should believe in the possibility of something new happening. The idea that, every month we could do something new, we could re-examine what the calendar is supposed to look like. Not necessarily for changing things, but I think there's a significant sense in which the way that the calendar was created once upon a time was about the ability to re-examine, the structure of our lives, the ability to say, okay, we're not quite in line with the months this time. We need to change it. We need to set it so that it works just right, as opposed to sort of just saying, "Oh, that's the way things are. We should leave them that way."
I think also it's really simple. You could just not count time at all. You could find no pattern in the month. You could find no pattern in the year if that's what you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But even the fact that you have like Rosh Hashanah, where religiously, I guess also New Year's kind of has this, like you're supposed to look at it like a new beginning. Then you're supposed to treat it like things can be different now because this is a new beginning. Essentially, it's just another day of the year. There's no reason it should really hold so much power. But the fact that you have created a schedule and a structure for the year makes that, like it imbues that day with power to renew you, even though it's just any other day. Like by having that calendar and the structure, especially the religious structure, you're actually given like lots of opportunities for newness. Because now there's a new thing happening.
You're saying like these like structure allows for.
Yeah, I mean, technically it could be that if we didn't keep track of every new moon and every month, there's no end point and beginning point. But the fact that you're supposed to keep track of the end and the beginning makes inherently times of newness.
Right. I think that's sort of the because I mean it's the sort of the paradox of New Year's resolutions. There's a structured time to start something new, but I think it's exactly what you're saying. Is that without that you'd be sort of just
Ongoing.
like hanging in the abyss.
Right.
There's no.
And it's totally made up. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be that way.
Right.
But you kind of, because it's there in the system, you've given yourself an opportunity, or in this case, God has given you an opportunity.
Like a New Year's
To
resolution
think
always
again.
happens on New Year's, but like you don't have to do it at that point. But that's
Right.
what people are like.
You're like inspired to do things at
Inspired,
the beginning.
right.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the way the calendar drives us in a significant way. It changes how we think in that sense. Any other questions?
It's so funny because like I feel like the title of your shiur was not talking about time. It's totally like you know.
Okay, I want to just finish by tying this back to the beginning. That if Froman's talking about the sort of revolutionary power of the calendar, that's exactly what that article is talking about, and that's what we're talking about in terms of Yetziat Mitzrayim. That Yetziat Mitzrayim is a sort of revolutionary moment, the revolution of the creation of the Jewish people and revolting against Egypt and leaving Egypt. That's sort of where we are right now, between the 1st of Nisan and the 15th, when the Jewish people are going to leave and we're going to have Pesach. And I think it's a sort of powerful way to go into Pesach, thinking about the ability to see it as a new beginning and a driving forward as part of our sort of collective calendar following people. Thank you.
Do you think,
And thank you again to Babayit for hosting.
do you think they scheduled the lunar landing at the same time as President HaHodesh on
Stab
purpose?
it. No.